Hey, everybody. It is Monday, July 7th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Noonan.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday weekend here in the U.S. Jill, how was yours?
It was very nice, a lot of family time. But I'm not upset that it's Monday and the kids are back at camp. So... yes.
Ready for a return to normalcy.
Exactly. And how was your weekend?
It was great. It was really nice. The weather Northeast was great. Not too hot. We got a lot of outdoor time away from New York City, which is always nice. And Jill, I tried in person Carvel for the first time. Beyond just having one of their ice cream cakes or whatever, I went to a Carvel and ordered. And we'll have to say that I have been missing out my first 4 decades of life.
Carvel ice cream. That's the jingle, in case you haven't heard it.
So people are like, well, what do you mean, Moshe? What took you so long? I was like, listen, I grew up in the Midwest. We're a Dairy Queen, Baskin-Robbins region. We're not so much a Carvel region. So it's taken me a while to get around to what is really something that I know is national, but really sort of, headquartered in the Northeast.
Next, you have to try Marvels, which is sort of like, in Coming to America, there's McDonald's and there's McDowell's.
McDowell's, yes.
On Long Island, there's Carvel and then there's Marvel.
Ah.
For real. There's a Marvel on the South Shore of Long Island that I think is kind of like...
I'm sure there's been lawsuits.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that there wouldn't be.
Well, I will make a point of getting to Marvel at some point, and I'll be able to compare the two. But we do have a lot of news to catch up on. I know those of you who joined Mo News Premium over the weekend, welcome. We tried to stay on top of a number of stories, including what's been unfolding, the tragedy that's been unfolding in Central Texas, which we will begin the podcast with today.
That's right now to the headlines. Deadly record-breaking flash floods struck Texas Hill Country over the weekend. Dozens are dead. The search continues now for the missing. We'll have the latest on the harrowing search for survivors, including missing girls from a summer camp. Lots of questions, though, like were weather alerts and forecasting enough to keep people safe?
Yeah, we'll get at what we've learned so far.
President Trump's big, beautiful bill was signed into law over the weekend. We break down more of what was in the law, including how ICE is now set to become the largest federal law enforcement agency in the United States.
Yeah, larger than many militaries around the world and much larger than the FBI in the coming years.
Major developments in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is at the White House today as it appears that Hamas and Israel on the verge of a new ceasefire. Now to the economy, a new deadline for those massive reciprocal tariffs that were technically set to return this week. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has now pushed back the deadline for countries to strike trade deals with the United States. We've got the details. A real third-party alternative to Republicans and Democrats. Billionaire Elon Musk says he's starting a new political party focused on government spending. What is it called? And is this real? And a glimpse at the world of 1975, the world's largest time capsule, opened 50 years later over the weekend, what it contained and why the creator was inspired to save a snapshot of life in the mid-70s. And speaking of time travel, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, you know the expression, it's the best thing since sliced bread? We will tell you, on this day in history is literally when sliced bread went on sale for the first time, we believe. So before that date, what did they say?
The best thing since bread?
The best thing since bread?
I think it's I think the fact that it was sliced was probably a really big deal. Because imagine you had to slice it yourself.
On this day in history, we tell you about it.
We begin with the tragedy unfolding in Central Texas. More than 400 first responders from over 20 agencies and countless volunteers are continuing to search a 30-mile stretch along Texas's Guadalupe River, looking for any survivors of the devastating floods that have already killed about 80 people as of Sunday night, more than 24 children among the dead. Among the hardest hit sites, a girls' summer camp in Carey County, Texas, called Camp Mystic. As of Sunday night, at least 11 campers and one counselor from Camp Mystic remain missing. Camp Mystic, located about 65 miles northwest of San Antonio in Texas Hill Country. At least 59 of those killed in the floods, and that includes at least 21 children, were in Kerr County, which is the epicenter of the flooding, but the rain and flooding continues across several hundred miles. 4 people were killed in Travis County, 3 in Burnett County, 2 in Kendall County, 1 in Tom Green County, and 1 in Williamson County. Dozens of people were still missing, including as many as 13 in Travis County. That includes Austin. Texas Governor Greg Abbott said late Saturday he visited Camp Mystic and that the camp has been, quote, horrendously ravaged by flooding in ways that he had not seen in other natural disasters. He says the rushing waters had reached the tops of the cabins. He posted on social media, quote, "We won't stop until we find every girl who was in those cabins." Moshe, absolutely heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking stuff, Jill. So many people in the news community impacted by these floods. We have a very large community in Texas, a number of people who'd gone to the camp, who are alums of the camp, people whose friends had kids going to the camp. So we've been getting a lot of notes over the weekend, very much praying for these 8-year-olds. In some cases, their first year ever going to camp. Sadly, the bunk hardest hit is the one closest to the river, which included some of the youngest campers. Camp Mystic really is a rite of passage for many girls, including from some very prominent Texas families, the daughters of senators, governors, business leaders as well. The camp, more than 100 years old, and had recently been run by the grandson of the family that bought the camp nearly a century ago, Dick Eastland, who, according to some local news reports, was killed in the flooding as he was trying to save campers. It's a place of many traditions. Many adults participate in various alumni events related to Camp Mystic, still might wear charms that represent their cabin from their time there. And a number, again, of prominent Texans sent their daughters there through the years. Former Texas governors, former U.S. Secretary of State James Baker. First Lady Laura Bush actually spent a summer during college as a counselor at Camp Mystic, was actually in touch with her daughter, Janet Bush Hager of the Today Show, who didn't attend Camp Mystic, but is very much in touch with a number of people that she knows in Texas who are connected or who have kids going there. Jill, just a note here, this tragedy stretches hundreds of miles. You mentioned the deaths in a variety of counties there, the rain still falling in a variety of areas, even as we record this late on Sunday night. So 3 days of just record rainfall there. But the storyline around Camp Mystic, the missing girls from there, really one of the most heartbreaking parts of what has just been a horrific situation unfolding there in Texas over the last few days.
So the search for survivors is growing more desperate. Volunteers are using horses to search areas that are just inaccessible to vehicles because of the flood damage. Among those who were killed in the flooding at Camp Mystic are 8-year-old Sarah Marsh from Alabama, 9-year-old Janie Hunt from Dallas. Janie was attending the camp with 6 of her cousins who are all safe. Separately among the dead, 27-year-old Julian Ryan. He died trying to punch through a window in his home so his fiance, 2 young sons, and mother could escape as floodwaters burst into their house. He cut an artery in the process and died before first responders could get to the scene. His family, though, is alive and calling him a hero. One of the most remarkable survival stories is that of a woman who was swept 20 miles downriver and was rescued Saturday when a local resident heard her screaming for help from a tree above the floodwaters. She had been camping with her family near Ingram, Texas. It's not clear what happened to her family. There have been hundreds of people rescued over the last few days, including several clinging to trees.
Yes, a number of those reports, and we put up some of the video over on Instagram of helicopters lifting people out of trees. Though sadly, Jill, there was a report on Sunday from one local newspaper that they'd found 2 of the young girls in a tree. And sadly, that report turned out not to be true. Unfortunately, officials there confirming that didn't happen, that was a rumor going around first responders and that had got to a local media outlet. So just wanted to... So I know a lot of us were hoping that story was true as there continue to be missing campers. But sadly, that rescue story, not true as of this recording.
So President Trump posted on social media Sunday that he signed a disaster declaration for Kerr County, saying, quote, "These families are enduring an unimaginable tragedy with many lives lost and many still missing." He said the federal government was working with state and local officials who are dealing with the flooding. President George W. Bush, who was the former governor of Texas, said in a statement, quote, "Laura and I are holding up our fellow Texans who are hurting. We are heartbroken by the loss of life and the agony so many are feeling." Moshe, as you mentioned, Laura Bush, once a counselor at Camp Mystic.
So Camp Mystic there and a lot of these campsites were located along the Guadalupe River, and it apparently rose more than 20 feet in less than an hour, Jill, in areas. A river gauge recorded a level of about 30 feet before it became completely submerged and failed. And this thing really grew to a record portion in the overnight hours of Thursday going into Friday. And it's one of the reasons here we're seeing such a high death toll. So the Weather Service, National Weather Service, was following all of this. Wednesday into Thursday. On Thursday afternoon, on July 3rd, it issued a watch. And we know a watch means, well, it could happen, right? A flash flood could happen. That's a watch. But we see a lot of storms coming to the area. There's a combination of tropical air, the remnants of a tropical storm, Barry, as well as a slow-moving system that was coming through. And they were set to drop a whole bunch of rainfall on the area. So there was this overall watch. And then in the overnight hours, just after 1 a.m., the National Weather Service upgrades that to a warning, meaning a dangerous flash flood is happening. And that's important for everyone to keep in mind. Watches, it could happen. Warning, it is happening. And that's what they issued a couple hours before we saw these massive increasing water levels. The problem is, it was after 1 a.m. going into a holiday, Thursday into Friday. Now, this was set to trigger, and I know a number of people who did receive these emergency push notifications to their phone in the emergency area. But of course, in some of those areas, there's no reception. Of course, in the case, tragically, of these children, they might not have had cell phones on them, though the counselors are presumably executive there at the camp did. And so just an hour and a half or so after this dangerous flash flood event warning that goes out, that's when the river reaches flood stage just about 3 a.m. near Camp Mystic. The worst flooding happens between 4 and 4:30. And the stories here, Jill, of the bunks being overwhelmed, going to the ceiling of the bunks. And again, just a matter of minutes and those aftermath photos that show that the water level hit above the highest bunks there. But you did see a situation as you went downriver there of a number of RV sites where just basically everything was just taken off of the ground and just floating down this massive surge. The most serious warning comes through from the National Weather Service at 4 a.m. that says an extremely dangerous and life-threatening situation is unfolding right now. Evacuate immediately to higher ground. But again, it's 4:03 a.m. But I heard from some folks in the news community, they were like, if we had waited 5 more minutes, we would have been taken on by the water. And you did see footage of just cars floating down the surging river there. Now, that has led to a blame situation here. Texas officials blaming the Weather Service, saying your forecast underestimated the amount of rain that eventually came. And former Weather Service officials have said the forecasts, though, were good and were as good as could be expected, given the way the storms escalated over time, and that they did their best, their forecasting ability, their best. They put out a flood watch and then put out a flood warning when that information became available. But that has led to questions, including from some of you, about whether the DOGE cuts, including to the Weather Service, have made an impact here. Whether it turns out that they are short-staffed now and they were unable to potentially make an earlier forecast because they don't have the staffing they once did. Now, we should note that based on the initial reporting here, the National Weather Service's office responsible for some of the hardest hit areas was missing 3 positions of a couple dozen positions. This is according to the union that represents Weather Service workers. Now, the Weather Service's nearby office in San Antonio, which covers other areas hit by flooding, they have several vacancies as well, including the warning coordination meteorologist who left on April 30th, taking an early retirement package when the Trump administration was trying to downsize federal employees. Even so, the National Weather Service says that they were adequately staffed. They put out warnings and watches when they were able to assess it, and that's what they're claiming. Now, I should say this situation is probably not going away anytime soon, but there are also people who are like, this is way too early. We're literally still looking for survivors in trees. So can we hold off on the political back and forth? But as we know these days, there is no holding off on politics, especially when there's potential blame here or people want to point fingers. And we do know that the National Weather Service has lost about 600 people nationally. It was about 4,000 strong until recently. So they have seen about 12% or so, 12 to 15% of their staffing go over the course of the past few months. Now, some offices much more impacted than others. Again, the ones in Texas say they were adequately staffed. And what's interesting, Jill, and this might be an admission that they might not be adequately staffed, the Weather Service did announce a plan recently to hire 126 people in positions around the country, despite the fact that they're continues to be a government hiring freeze. So I don't know how much that clarified things beyond just to say there's a lot of accusations going around at the moment.
As you said, many people were asleep during the storms, which happened before dawn. The Weather Service says the warning was set up to set off mobile phone alerts and wake people in the path of the flooding. The local Weather Service offices appear to have sent out the correct warnings. But as you said, the timing of the flood may be more crucial to the outcome. The alerts came during the start of the holiday weekend when RV parks, cabins, homes are filled with tourists who are less familiar with how flood-prone the area is and perhaps aren't used to getting alerts. The hill country where this river flooded is often referred to as Flash Flood Alley because rainfall gets funneled through the hilly terrain and the canyons into the valleys. That river rose 29 feet in 1987, killing 10 teenagers after the bus that they were in as they tried to evacuate a church camp was swept away near Comfort, Texas, which is less than 20 miles from Kerrville. In Wimberley, a small city roughly 90 minutes east of Kerrville, 13 people were killed and hundreds of homes were destroyed and damaged in 2015 when the Blanco River rose nearly 30 feet within a couple of hours. So not unheard of for this to happen in this general area.
No, sadly, and it has people asking why the county doesn't have an advanced flood warning system, especially an area known as Flash Flood Alley in Texas. But it has apparently been deemed too expensive in the past for them to invest in. Jill, again, you're going to have accusations here about the Weather Service. You're going to have accusations about DOJ cuts to the Weather Service. You're going to have the Weather Service on defense saying, we put out the warnings. It was on the first responders and on county officials and on state officials to take our warnings and calls for people to get out and execute upon them. So just perspective here as you are set to hear a lot about this in the coming days, as unfortunately, Jill, so many Texas families will be mourning lost ones. And just again on what is, typically a celebratory weekend where people are getting together with friends and family and enjoying the outdoors. Just a tragic situation that unfolded there.
Okay, time for the speed read from the Washington Post. The big, beautiful bill is now law. President Trump signed his signature domestic policy legislation into law on Friday at the White House. We are still diving into the details of the nearly 1,000-page bill, including how much it is meant to bolster President Trump's agenda regarding deportations and the border. Included in this package is enough funding to make Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, the largest federal law enforcement agency in the U.S. with more agents than the FBI. The law provides for nearly $170 billion in new funding over 5 years for Trump's immigration agenda, including $45 billion for detention centers, $14 billion for deportations, $30 billion to hire more ICE personnel, and $46 billion to finish the border wall. The funding could allow the administration to add 10,000 ICE agents and 8,500 Customs and Border Protections officials and expand the number of beds in detention facilities from 41,000 to 100,000. The bill represents the biggest immigration enforcement investment in U.S. history, with more funding going to ICE over 4 years than the combined budgets of the FBI, DEA, ATF, Bureau of Prisons, and the U.S. Marshal Service. Again, Moshe, that's combined.
Yeah, it's significant, Jill. And people are making comparisons to kind of globally that the expanded ICE budget now rivals the defense and military budgets of a number of countries around the world. We're now spending more on ICE than the Israelis spend on their entire military. Canada spends on its military. The Italians spend on their military. The Brazilians spend on the military. And so just, some striking numbers here. ICE, by the way, their budget this year is about $8 billion. And they're already $1 billion over budget. So I think people anticipated that there would be more money going to ICE, but certainly this is a very significant margin. Also in the bill, more than $3 billion to support immigration courts, drug trafficking and policing programs. Though there is a cap on immigration judges in terms of how many they hire here, despite a major backlog. There's a backlog of years going to the fact that there's 3 million cases and just not enough judges. So that's been a major factor here. And there's been calls for investment in a while here. And so there is some investment, but not as much as some advocates were calling for, much more on the enforcement side and the arrest side and deportation side than the actual judges and the court system to deal with that. So that has some people asking questions about a process moving forward here. And frankly, how much of an impact this is going to have, because it's going to take some time here for them to recruit, hire, train, and deploy these new assets. And it does come at a time where legal border crossings are down more than 90% year over year. A number of these Trump tactics and strategies over the last year have shown to be extremely successful in curtailing people from crossing the border. And so he's very much now focused on the people already in the country. And we've talked to you about the whole debate over people with criminal backgrounds versus people with not criminal backgrounds. And the Trump administration is very focused on, like, at least the highest officials, Stephen Miller, the Homeland Security Advisor, and people around Trump, on pushing ICE to focus on all of the above, and not just people with criminal records, but even people who have been working for years in the U.S. trying to become legal through a process, but are currently undocumented. And so you've seen that more and more. The border czar, Tom Homan, said that whether the administration can fulfill its goal of deporting 1 million undocumented migrants this year will depend on this funding. And so this could potentially result here in a dramatic increase in the number of arrests. Again, the question is, how long will it take them to start to deploy this money, train up folks, et cetera? And what does it mean for just overall execution and how ICE handles itself? There has been criticism over its tactics, especially in areas where the local police do not cooperate with them. In a number of Democratic states, we saw how things have unfolded in California recently. And it's interesting here, Jill, the Republicans had divides over a lot of aspects of the bill, but this part, none. Republicans extremely supportive of this agenda, that when you do zoom out and include independents and Democrats nationally, the Trump immigration policies, deportation policies, and this massive increase in funding, a majority of Americans do not support it, but it is extremely popular, again, amongst Republicans.
Trump has at times appeared to respond to the public pressure, his administration flip-flopping on whether to continue to conduct enforcement raids on farms, which often rely heavily on undocumented workers. Last month, the Department of Homeland Security issued guidance instructing agents not to conduct immigration raids at farms, hotels, and restaurants, only to reverse the directive days later. And then last week, Trump again suggested that there could be exemptions made for undocumented farm workers and those in the hotel industry.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of industries that depend on undocumented labor. We've heard from some of you in the Mo News community that are having trouble building a home or doing renovations or a variety of things because they depend on undocumented labor. And in many cases, even if those people have not been deported, they're scared to show up to work because they have been doing workplace raids. So there has been pushback, even among some Republicans, saying, hey, guys, can you please continue to just focus on people with criminal backgrounds and not, do workplace raids where you have created a situation, whether it's in agriculture, hospitality, construction, a variety of sectors, that is going to have an economic impact here to the negative, and potentially an inflationary impact as prices rise because there's just a shortage of workers. And in some cases, some of these are jobs that Americans are unwilling to take at the wages that are currently being paid. And just a reminder here, that's one aspect of the multi-trillion-dollar bill here. There were also tax cuts. There were the Medicaid cuts, a variety of things. We tried to drill down on a few of them in posts on the Instagram feed over the weekend, but please email us with questions, info@mo.news. If there are certain aspects of the bill you still have questions about. Again, a massive bill here that will continue to have an impact here for years to come.
Heading overseas from the Associated Press, Hamas officials and Israeli leaders made statements this weekend gesturing at the possibility of renewed ceasefire talks. However, there are major differences between both sides that remain an obstacle to peace. So Hamas said Friday that it was ready to begin negotiations with Israel, quote, immediately over the implementation of a ceasefire proposal intended to pause the fighting in Gaza for 60 days, a window during which negotiators could work to secure a final end to the conflict. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded Saturday, calling Hamas's latest ceasefire proposal unacceptable to Israel, but he added that he had authorized negotiators to travel to Qatar on Sunday for talks. It is not clear what is in Hamas's latest proposal. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is set to meet with President Trump today at the White House, their third get-together since Trump's election. In Israel's support for ending the war in Gaza has been growing as this war approaches 22 months. especially in the aftermath of the war in Iran and the success that Israel had there, and against the Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon over the last year. Israel also facing pressure from President Trump to wrap things up. He has other priorities in the Middle East that are effectively frozen because of the current war. The proposed American truce calls for a 60-day pause in fighting. So again, not exactly clear what is in Hamas's counter proposal, although Hamas has always insisted that any deal must lead to a full and lasting end to hostilities, as well as their ability to stay in Gaza. And they are so far rejecting Netanyahu's terms for ending the war.
Yeah, Netanyahu's terms are Hamas, lay down your weapons and you guys all leave and you are done forever. And he's also been pushing for temporary ceasefires as opposed to a permanent ceasefire as long as Hamas sticks around. And that's really what this whole thing has come down to, and why this is just taking month upon month upon month, is who will keep certain territory in Gaza? What is Hamas's future ultimately? And it appears that, what Trump is hoping to get to with Netanyahu when he visits the White House today is some sort of basic framework for how to end this thing finally. Because as you mentioned, Jill, he wants to move on, and he's got deals that he wants to make with the Saudis and the UAE and Qatar, and all of them are like, hold up, well, Gaza's going on, we're not doing anything major. And the big, hot potato, so to speak, Jill, is who governs Gaza afterward. For the Israelis, they won't even deal with a situation where somebody else governs Gaza, but Hamas is still sort of there in the background as a fully armed militia, because to them, that would be a recreation of what's existed in Lebanon for the past few decades, where there has been a non-Hezbollah government, but Hezbollah is basically hanging out and is more powerful than the military of Lebanon, at least until recently. And so their concern is some other group comes in, some other Palestinian group comes in, but ultimately Hamas still has the most weapons, and Hamas still dictates the foreign policy of Gaza. So for them, they want a blank slate. The Israelis want a blank slate that does not include a future for Hamas in the Gaza Strip, whether in the government or existing at all. But of course, Hamas interested in, its own future. The Israelis hoping here with Iran licking its wounds from this war, less relevant when it comes to Hamas, less willing to help these groups around the Middle East for now, that they're hoping this is a weak point for Hamas and they can strike a deal here. By the way, beyond Hamas, one of the big agenda items for Netanyahu and Trump today is also what's next for Iran. The Israelis basically want a green light to be able to go in and bomb things in Iran whenever they feel a need to. If they see Iran doing things related to its missile program or nuclear program, again, that'll be something that'll be on the agenda, as well as like what happens long term here. There's been a debate in the intelligence communities about whether the program in Iran was set back a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Nonetheless, even at the sort of most aggressive end, say 5 to 7 years, that still means that Iran conceivably could still work on a program underground again. What do they do about that? Will there be negotiations? There is a meeting set for the Iran foreign minister and the U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, in Oslo this week. So we'll wait to see what comes of that. So Iran, despite sort of the heated rhetoric and the we totally won the war, well, they're willing to talk to the U.S. again here. Jill, one other agenda item, what happens in Israel and Syria? They border each other. They've had basically a state of war and several wars through the years. But the Israelis effectively, through their move against Hezbollah and Iran, opened the door to this new leader, al-Shara, to take over, the rebels to take over. So, he doesn't like Israel, but certainly understands that the consequences of their actions is what helped him get to power. And Trump is very eager to expand what's called the Abraham Accords, which was an agreement that he got in the first term between Israel and several Arab countries. He wants to add more Arab countries to the mix, including Syria. They see that as sort of a way to prevent future costly conflicts if they're all sort of economically wedded to each other. The Israelis are very open to a deal there with the Syrians. The question, of course, is what does each side have to give the other to get to that deal? But again, they sort of see Gaza as the linchpin here. Once Gaza is done, it opens the door to a bunch of other deals.
To the economy from Bloomberg, U.S. officials are busy negotiating through the holiday weekend with trading partners, including Japan, South Korea, the European Union, and India, ahead of the 90-day deadline that President Trump set for countries to make trade deals with the United States or risk substantially higher tariffs. Trump's tariff pause is slated to end this Wednesday. The president threatened Friday to send about a dozen countries letters today telling them the rate at which their exports to the U.S. will be taxed. Some countries could see tariffs as high as 70%.
We'll look at how a country treats us. Are they good? Are they not so good? Some countries, we don't care. We'll just send a high number out.
Even as Trump's letters are set to arrive, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent suggested a new deadline on Sunday, saying that countries that don't make trade deals with the U.S. by August 1st can expect tariff rates to return to the levels that President Trump announced in April.
We're going to be very busy over the next 72 hours. President Trump's going to be sending letters to some of our trading partners saying that if you don't move things along, then on August 1st, you will boomerang back to your April 2nd tariff level.
Those letters, Moshe, I'm picturing him like furiously writing a handwritten letter, sending it out.
He loves to write with the Sharpie. You guys might have seen the note that he wrote to the Federal Reserve Chair. He has this very flowery handwriting that he does with Sharpies. He prefers them, he says, to pens. And so the only question, Jill, I have is is he using normal U.S. Postal Service, or is it like FedEx? We're working on deadline here.
So Trump has said he preferred those letters to negotiations after a 3-month pause on his most sweeping tariffs led to only 3 deals rather than the 90 his administration has promised. Those 3 trade deals are with the UK, China, and Vietnam.
And we should note they're not necessarily fully signed deals even, Jill. They're outlines of deals.
Beyond that, Indian officials have signaled a tougher stance in recent days, threatening tariffs on some U.S. goods in retaliation to Washington's higher tariffs on automobiles and their components. Also concerned about auto tariffs is South Korea, which has discussed with U.S. officials extending the deadline in a last-ditch bid to avert the higher tariffs. EU member states were briefed on the status of negotiations on Friday after a round of talks in Washington last week, and were told that a technical agreement in principle was close. The Japanese prime minister said the country is prepared for all possible tariff scenarios, saying Japan is ready to, quote, stand firm and defend its interests.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see the rhetoric that they use publicly for their own domestic consumption, and then also what they're negotiating with the U.S. Found it notable, Jill, last week we reported on the deal with Vietnam, where Vietnam has accepted, allegedly, a 20% tariff on their goods to the U.S., but is not even charging a 1% tariff against our goods to their country. So now it appears what was the July 9th deadline is really an August 1st deadline. So we'll see what comes with this new date in play. How much of a difference about 3 weeks here will really matter here, and whether we will see another delay from August 1st to September and so on and so forth. Reminder here, this is all related to those massive global tariffs that Trump set back in April. Remember what it did to the market. So Trump backtracked, announced this 90-day pause. There still is a 10% global tariff that didn't exist before on basically most goods coming into the U.S. from nearly every country on Earth. And then he's been looking to strike deals here. But as we've told you, striking trade deals with individual countries sometimes takes years of negotiations. And he was hoping to do 90 countries in 90 days. Hence why it appears here they're at least giving it a few more weeks, and we'll see what comes of all of that. And we should note, Jill, trade deals are not all equal. Some of these countries, much larger trading partners than others. So you have the Mexicans, the Canadians, the Chinese, much more significant trading partners than, some of these smaller countries, but not insignificant, especially if you're an American small business or importer and you're bringing in things from some of these smaller countries.
From CNN, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, said Saturday he is forming a third political party after a dramatic falling out with President Trump over his tax cuts and spending bill, which Trump, as we reported, signed into law on Friday. It is unclear to what extent Musk has actually taken steps to legally form the party. He is calling it the, quote, America Party. The party would be required to register with the FEC, or the Federal Election Commission, but the most recent FEC filings show no indication that that's happened. Musk said on X that the party had officially been, quote, formed to give you back your freedom. He's indicated he wants a party that is fiscally conservative and reins in spending, but he has offered few other details about what the party's platform would be. Musk and Trump hold similar views on contemporary social issues, but Musk has criticized Trump's big, beautiful bill because of estimates that it would add trillions of dollars to the federal deficit. A majority of Americans also oppose Trump's signature domestic policy legislation. This is according to a Washington Post Ipsos poll conducted last month. A 63% majority of the public saying in the poll that the spending package's estimated $3 trillion increase to the national debt is unacceptable.
Yeah, though typically you see that as an issue on the right. And so it's very interesting, Jill, here that Elon is trying for a third party because many of you have asked for a long time, are we ever going to see a sort of centrist party? But certainly Elon has taken on some of Trump's viewpoints on the right. So what this party will really ends up being is a big question, Jill. Andrew Yang was part of a third party effort. That wasn't really taken very seriously. RFK Jr. said he was starting a third party. He didn't really take that very seriously. And of course, ended up just kind of endorsing Trump and, getting a position in his administration. So we have seen these attempts going back years. Ross Perot probably had the most successful effort in the 90s. But then even his party, minus him, hasn't done much, if anything, over the past 2.5 decades. And really the two parties have set up a system here that is beneficial to the two of them. And so getting a third party in there that's really going to make a difference does require someone who's very serious about it, someone who's experienced about it, and someone who's willing to sort of, stay with it until it's successful. And that's going to be the big question here with Elon is this is just revenge against Trump because they've been smack talking each other and they're very unhappy with each other. Or is Elon serious here? We should say that Elon burned about $300 million supporting Trump and Republicans. So we'll see how much more he's willing to do here and whether he sees a business advantage, because remember, his businesses have been hit significantly by his sort of dabbling in politics here. So will he make a difference here? Well, you will get the first test next year with the midterms in the House and Senate and see if Elon actually wants to put his money where his mouth is again. For what it's worth, Jill, over the weekend, Trump said, it's really sad to see Elon go off the rails and become a train wreck.
But if you're wondering what Musk is so upset about, it seems like it is really the government spending and the fact that the big, beautiful bill is going to raise the deficit by so much. Musk writing on Twitter, what was the point of Doge if the president is just going to increase the debt by $5 trillion? So you kind of get it, right? From his perspective, what was the point of making those cuts, of bringing everyone on board, when for him, at least, he's arguing it's kind of for naught?
Well, yeah, but it's interesting because that is a serious issue and does have huge economic consequences for us. But ultimately, is he forming a party that basically is going to tell Americans, we're all going to go to Washington and keep cutting things the government does for you? That's one of the reasons why government has such trouble cutting things over the years, Jill. It is extremely unpopular. I mean, look at the cuts that even, get us $1 trillion in savings, related to Medicaid and food stamps. And, and we talked earlier about the National Weather Service. Ultimately, these cuts have ramifications and there are savings to be found. And the government is hugely inefficient. And that was one thing that he tried to do when he found what was it, 100 billion in cuts at Doge. He wanted $2 trillion. He found 100 billion. So, he's passionate. Elon Musk is passionate about a few things: having lots of kids and repopulating Earth. Personally, he's given us 14 children that we know of. And then the other thing he's really big on is apparently cutting the deficit. And the other thing is getting to Mars. He has a few things that are core to who Elon is. But again, I don't know how popular the deficit cutting party run by Elon Musk is going to be given to his overall reputation these days. Liberals hate him, for being with Trump, and now a bunch of Trump supporters hate him for going against Trump. So I don't know how many Elon fans are left.
It'll be him and Rand Paul, basically. But no, I think that you make a good point, because one of the common things that politicians like to say is they're going to cut the waste, fraud, and abuse. But that's not enough. That's not enough to balance the budget.
No, at this point, we spend $7 trillion a year as a government. $1 trillion on defense. Good luck cutting military and defense spending. There's a lot of waste there, but Godspeed to you. Then another $1 trillion on Social Security, another $1 trillion, a couple $1 trillion on Medicaid and Medicare. And then the rest of the entire government is less than $1 trillion, right? And we pay $1 trillion in interest on our debt every year. So again, I'm just giving you the raw math. Elon, certainly you can find lots to cut, my friend, but it will be hugely unpopular with many, many Americans. Hence why it hasn't been done yet. But listen, all the more power to him. If he actually wants to create a legit third party in this country, we certainly would love another choice.
And finally, from NBC News, what's been called the, quote, world's largest time capsule was opened over the weekend in Nebraska. A furniture store owner in Seward, Nebraska, Harold Davison, buried the time capsule in 1975 on the front lawn of his store. But this was not your average time capsule. It was a 45-ton concrete vault containing a brand new 1975 Chevy Vega, a Kawasaki motorcycle, pet rocks, Barbie dolls, and over 5,000 other artifacts from the mid-70s. It took 3 days to crack the vault open to put the collectibles from 50 years ago on display. People traveled from around the country to retrieve keepsakes contributed by their family members, things like letters, photographs, and wedding invitations.
Jill, quite a indication of the 1970s. Chevy Vega, probably one of the worst made cars in history, was sort of notable for like sort of Detroit going south. Also, the pet rock, a thing from the 70s, like literally it was a rock, but people called it a pet rock. Sort of had to be there in the moment. I mean, that wasn't my era. That's not our era, Jill. That's before our era, but that's my understanding of the pet rock.
It's literal.
It's literal. It's a rock that sits in your desk and you call it a pet. It didn't. It's not even like a Tamagotchi or whatever from the 90s, where like it's
or like a chia pet
or a chia pet, right? Like that like grows or moves or anything. No, literally, it's 1970s. You stared at the rock. Apparently, this was certified back in 1977 as the world's largest time capsule, only to lose that record just a few years later to another time capsule. But still pretty notable, Jill, a time capsule that is large enough to, I was kind of imagining a small time capsule, and you're like, no, there's a motorcycle in it and a car. So it was pretty big. It was like King Tut's tomb. Jill, speaking of time capsules, we'll take you back to some notable things on this day in history, on this July 7th. On this day in 1898, Congress annexed Hawaii through a joint resolution signed by the president at that time, paving the way for Hawaii to become a territory and then a U.S. state finally in 1959. Though, Jill, something very controversial, the way that basically U.S. investors and businessmen took Hawaii and forcibly turned it into a territory and a state. We've done histories on it over on the premium feed, but sort of ugly history to how the U.S. forcibly took Hawaii. On this day in 1928, in Chilcote, Missouri, sliced bread went on sale for the first time, as in sliced at the store and sold to you. Apparently, there was a machine designed specifically to slice bread in advance. It was baked by a local company there in Missouri. And so on this day, sliced bread goes on sale, which means the best thing since sliced bread would mean the best thing since 1928. Translation.
I wonder what they used to say before that. Like the best thing since...
That's the big question. The wagon?
The wheel?
The wheel? Best thing since the
That'd be
wheel?
a long time before,
right,
though.
but that's been a while. Since gunpowder? I don't know. I was like thinking like the steam engine. Let us know if
anyone actually knows.
If you're a historian of expressions. All right. On this day in 1958, the first IHOP opened in Toluca Lake, California. And on this day, 2009, a huge memorial service was held for late pop star Michael Jackson, broadcast to more than 2.5 billion people around the world, featured Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, Mariah Carey, Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson. Jackson sadly died at the age of 50. On June 25th of that year. Jill, this year, he would be turning 67 years old. And on this day in 2019, the U.S. women's soccer team defeated the Netherlands to win their 4th World Cup. The U.S., the most prolific women's soccer team in the world with 4 World Cups overall.
I remember that match. It was only 6 years ago.
People complain sometimes. They're like, your history is like, you go so far back. And I was like, all right, once in a while we'll do recent history. So
last
year, on this day last year, Mo said to Jill, I promise to bring you more recent on this days in history.
All right, everyone. That is a wrap for this Monday. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.